BHM, the Media Project. Breaking Housing Matters is a national housing initiative designed to build housing profitably. It is a first-of-its-kind initiative currently being piloted in Vermont, USA. BHM brings multiple key stakeholders from the housing development ecosystem together to solve the dual issues of affordability and profitability. Participate in an all-ships-rise approach designed by a multiplicity of internationally recognized experts in development, economics, housing, and governance. Learn more and purchase the book Custom-Made Housing for a New World Disorder by BHM founder Peter DeCrassel at breakinghousingmatters.org. Press and program inquiries should please contact our agent at scott@smgravesassociates.com.
Hey, welcome back, all those fans of SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast. We're really happy to have you back. I'm your host, Scott M. Graves, and today we're focused on the subject of artificial intelligence. My guest is David J. Neff. Currently, he serves as operating partner at Austin, Texas-based Ecliptic Capital, where he works with portfolio companies on people, process, marketing, strategy, and culture. He spearheads the fund's concentration on climate change and energy transition as part of Ecliptic Capital's deep tech thesis. And our conversation is focused on the recent report Ecliptic released, offering a comprehensive look at considerations for the consequences of artificial intelligence, called How Artificial Intelligence is Transforming Our World at Hypersonic Speed. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I was so pleased that you allowed me to review this report some time ago. It's extremely interesting in its, I want to say, comprehensive perspectives. Mm-hmm. It's on balance, I think, which is also really great. But perhaps we can start with what the basic premise was. Why did you guys want to put out this report in the first place?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have kind of three main thesis areas at Ecliptic Capital that we think a lot about: cybersecurity, identity sovereignty, healthcare software, with even some medical devices being a part of that, and then climate. And then under climate, we think a lot about the built environment, material science, things like that, right? And what we saw in the last 2 years, the last 3 years, even before I started, was this creep in of a lot of startups that would say AI powered, right? Or the tagline would be AI, and you're like, well, what do you actually mean by that? And you start to peel the onion a little bit and have conversations with, what do they mean, right? Is it actual algorithms and AI principles as we think of them? Is it more just data science? Is it more machine learning? Nothing bad about that, but it was this kind of broad term that gets bandied about a lot, right? And Scott, I just got back from South by Southwest, which is here in Austin, Texas. And I mean, I would love to see the number of panels that had that in the title, and then some sort of correlation to who was actually talking about AI in those panels.
Well, wait a minute now. So my former industry, the record business, at one point, people realized if I put a parental advisory sticker on my album, it could be Sesame Street music, but if I put that sticker on my album, my sales are going to go up by X%. Are you suggesting the use of, bandying about this term in order to seek interest from venture capitalists and other worthwhile resources, or like where are people going with this?
Yeah. Oh, I think that's absolutely it. Right. And again, there is AI as a marketing term, and then there's AI as we understand it and define it. And as you might talk to a PhD in computer science, which I am not, who has specialized on this for 20 years, right? And they might just have that specialty in computer vision, right? or knowledge-based systems or neural networks. So you get even to a lower and lower taxonomy. You double click and you double click and you double click. So for us, we're just like, what is this? Why is it important? We know that part. But like, let's get into defining it. Let's try and understand it. And so went out, worked for probably 8 or 9 months on doing some research. We had a fantastic venture fellow, Phoebe Lambert, who is at Yale, who helped Mike Millard, who's the primary author and works at Ecliptic Capital with me on this, right?
Shout out to Mike. He couldn't be here this evening. Otherwise, he would be here this evening.
That's right. And, I feel like we wanted to define it for ourselves and then start to look at examples in the 3 areas that we concentrate on. So totally selfish reasons. But then we started to think about it as an external tool and publishing, and obviously people like yourselves and a lot of other folks have kind of gravitated towards it and downloaded it, and we've had a lot of fun conversations about it.
So first off, walk our listeners through the different facets of society sort of represented, or major industries and so forth represented in the report, just to give people a sense of, its comprehensive nature. We're talking about the consequences of artificial intelligence and then it's kind of filtered through a variety of different major either social phenomenon or industries and what have you.
Yeah. I think the way we think about it, we talk about it with life sciences, because obviously life sciences, a little bit of that healthcare software that we invest in, we know about medical devices that we know and think about, identity and security, which obviously relates back to cybersecurity and things we concentrate on, energy and materials, which is kind of code for climate tech in this world, but we wanted a little broader category to talk on. But then, we started to get into these other double clicks like education, law, finance, manufacturing, transportation. And again, right, this is not 90 pages long because no one would read it. And we're not a university publishing this. So we tried to kind of chop it up into those main categories.
And I find it, for those of us very interested, regardless of the reason, in artificial intelligence, we need documents like this that are set up to spark hopefully some real meaningful discussion around it, right? Yeah. It's not a question of being for or against AI. This is like an infantile thing, but much of the conversation around artificial intelligence right now is, are you for or against? Because we like that, right? We like football games in our culture. However, I don't know that that's really the direction we need to go. Let me ask the broad level question of you right here, right now. Are we people is this society ready for artificial intelligence and to use it to its maximum positive effect?
The first part of that question is yes. The second part of that question is a question mark, right? I mean, we've been working on this problem since the 1950s. You can trace things into the 60s. You can go out and your listeners can find and read about the AI winter that happened around funding and things like that. And you'll hear a lot of people pontificate of like, are we going to get so scared of AI in 2024 that we're going to have another AI winter where we just pretend it's not happening? I don't think that's the case. The proverbial genie's out of the bottle, right? You saw it into the 90s, the 2010s, just a real explosion kind of leading us up to where we are right now on the timeline, right?
Sure.
So I think, yes, we're ready to use it. We are using it. It is supplementing some chatbot that one of your listeners just had a conversation with because they were talking to AT&T about a defect in their iPhone. And you have no idea. You don't know. Maybe maybe you can tell a little bit. It's in that robocall, maybe that calls you to ask you about, solar panels or window siding or things like that. It's already creeped in to all these parts of our lives. Now, the question is, the farther we go down, the responsibility of who and what. I went to a good panel, again, at South by Southwest on artificial general intelligence. And it was a roboticist and then like a pure theoretical PhD. And they were kind of having this animated discussion at each other, right? And one of the things that I'll always remember for the next however many years that came out of that was the theoretical guy talking about, well, great, we're training all of these artificial intelligence systems, but who's right? So China has one, The US has one. The US military is doing this thing over here. China's military is doing this thing over here. Oh, by the way, the billionaires who have these massive companies are doing something. IBM's doing something over here. Maybe the Department of Energy is doing something, and we're like, who's in charge of that, and who's defining what those characteristics should be?
Who's in charge of the people in charge of that?
That's right. And nobody is, right? Because they're
Right.
all independent bodies in our world working on this problem.
Right.
And then, the science fiction step beyond that is like, well, cool. And you create these and they all start talking to each other. Who's monitoring that? Who's having the conversations? And that's a ways off.
And
right?
I ask a question like
problem.
that, David, not because I'm not a Luddite against this technology.
Sure.
But to me, it's like because we've come up with a whole bunch of different technologies for quite some time now in human experience that resonate far beyond a singular industry or a singular social phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it's not the technology, it's not the tool that's the problem, it's us, and the way that we use tools either against each other, or you're in proximity to sort of describe, an example of that. And we've had conversations on this podcast recently, one with Dr. Melton Balin about AI and neurodiversity and who makes the choices. This kind of resonates with what you just said a second ago about who's making those choices about what the average person or the average life experience is that's represented by AI, right? But we also then talked about good users versus users that would use this for nefarious purposes and stuff, and how there's really just what you said. There's no real sort of control over that, right? Again, an example of controlling human behavior. We've talked about like the idea of the bionic worker. And that sounds like to me like that's incredible. And even personally, I've recently experienced this. When you've got some rather mundane work to do, you can be using AI technology to help increase what you already know and what you're already doing, and to speed up the process, right? So that you can more focus on the creative part, right, and the decision making part. Then there's this whole idea that same use of the technology could just externalize workforce, right? So so how do we, I'm interested, I'm going to guess you guys have put some thought into like, how could we use this as a force for good and concentrate on that rather than concentrating on a use for bad, And is it a policy maneuver we need? Is it, we change the culture through educating people a different way moving forward? Like or is it all of those things or none of those things?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I see a lot of parallels to climate. And so maybe I'll use that analogy. We've got these goals. We've got this 1.5 goal. We've got a let's keep it under 2 degrees goal. And planet-wide, we're having to make massive shifts to try and go towards those goals. And guess what? Some countries may never play along, right? For economic reasons, for nefarious reasons, for all sorts of manners, right? They don't have access to it. And some of these nations over here are going to help some of these nations come along if we want to meet those goals, right? And so you take that huge, crazy systematic problem, right? And you think of policy, you think of funding, economics, you think of maybe what is the right thing to do as human beings with other people on the planet, right? And then we also have this fallacy that like big tech is going to save us all, which is not true, right?
Somehow the tools are going to do it and not us. We keep coming back to this in this conversation, right? Like it's the people.
That's right. And AI is the same way, right? You can take each of those things I just mentioned, and there's some aspect of funding AI, government regulation of AI, people developing their own AI. And, that's where this all gets messed up, is that, man, making all those people work together, even at least in climate, we kind of have a shared goal, but what's the shared goal in AI? There's no worldwide governing body that's like, these are the Isaac Asimov 3 rules of humanoid robots or AI, right?
That's fascinating. And I haven't really looked at it from that perspective. And I mean, it's so were you encouraged when a nonprofit was created to sort of help steward, billions of the funds that were used to invest in artificial intelligence, through OpenAI? What is that? But it's not part of their charter, is it? What you're describing?
That's right. Right. My charter and OpenAI, as far as I know, is a U.S. based, U.S. led nonprofit
with U.S. interests.
With U.S. interest, right?
Yeah.
And at least in climate, you have IPCC that's been meeting for the last 30 years. Every couple of years, they come together at COP, a conference of parties. They come together, they say, here's what's going on, here's what we're trying to do. Sign up, countries. Who's on board, who's not? And every once in a while you get called out because your president gets elected and he or she backs out, but then the next president jumps back in, right? And it's just crazy to me, Scott, that AI doesn't have something at this like global level that affects us that quickly. But it's also hard to get your hands around it because it can be so many things and it's called so many things, right?
But you offer in the report some really meaningful and frankly frightening statistics. Can you recount some of the statistics, particularly around, let's start with just workforce development, with what we estimate to be, these jobs will no longer exist. X% of the population's jobs will change.
I don't have that number in front of me, or off the top of my head. But
forgive me, I should have said something ahead of time. But it's big. Let's just put it that way, folks. If you're listening, it's big. It's not like 2%.
But again, that is just a stat from a company, right, or a consultancy that's done the numbers, right?
Yeah.
I think it's more about industries, right? I know in our report we talk about medical and healthcare, fintech, security, data protection, data management, and even retail. And those are the top industries that are kind of benefiting from AI investment, right? So yes, all day long, you'll hear stats from like a PwC or a McKinsey or other people about job displacement. But also, like, I think if you flip that, it's more about investment, turbocharging. It's what you said earlier, right? We are going to help people do more with a little bit less because of the awesome use of AI. And I do think some of those numbers that the big folks are throwing out are a little bit of fear mongering, right? And are like, you know what? I'm sure your listeners have seen some of these humanoid robots from Boston Dynamic or Optimus from Tesla. Yes, if there's 5 million of those doing manual labor inside of an Amazon factory, XYZ, not that you'd need that, that would absolutely replace jobs. But hey, guys, also each of those humanoid robots we see, that basically has a power pack the size of Tesla's on it. It's going to need to be plugged into the grid. That's going to cause more people to go work on the grid and electric and batteries. So maybe it's a shifting of jobs, but I think some of those numbers are a little fear mongering. Right?
Yeah. Well, and again, it to me, it seems if we're navigating, we know that that's happening. It's about a paradigm shift to let's let our tool displace jobs that people won't need to do anymore. And then let's use other facets of our economy to turbocharge their, path, their path towards high paying, meaningful work. This is possible, right? We have the resources to do this. It's not part of our financial model today, but it could be.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
And another way to answer that question is, what is AI good at? Right. And we do have that. And to me, AI is good at data analysis when you set the correct parameters, right? You and I can look at something and maybe we've honed our craft, honed our skill level, and we can pull insights out. I haven't seen the AI that can crunch those numbers, but then also pull out the little insights because things are different yet. And I'm sure it's coming, but it's not there. So data analysis, repetitive tasks, pattern recognition, natural language processing, data security. It's funny because we all talk about autonomous vehicles, but actually it's not that great at autonomous vehicles, right? We were promised this car driving itself 5 years ago, and everybody who's listening to the sound of my voice and has a Tesla and paid for full self-driving knows that that's not the case. Like it's still sometimes braking under a bridge because it thinks it's a shadow that you're about to drive into as a hole. So, we're still not there. So I'm not worried about that job displacement in the near future as much as some folks think.
Let's focus on your world as it relates to AI, and that is on climate tech and solving. This is the most existential of problems that we face right now, and it affects every single other system that in turn is affecting it, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of that, plugging in things, creating more, potentially more of an energy problem. Just the data center capacity alone, right? To fully launch AI as an international phenomenon over the next generation, right? So how are we going to solve the issue of climate tech and do it in a way and with the use of artificial intelligence where it can be, but also not create more of an energy issue than we already have?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's going to be one of the key challenges of all of this, right? Zero Week just happened in Houston, Texas, which is kind of Davos for the energy crowd, right? All the big oil people there, a lot of the startups in the space, investors, other folks. And, one of the big things that came out of that is exactly what you said. We would like to use AI to optimize grids, to optimize energy distribution, to optimize batteries, to increase charge life, everything you can possibly imagine that AI is good at, right? Taking structured to unstructured data, plugging it in, determining where the next wildfire is going to be. How are we powering all that, right?
Yeah.
Because the grid is not up to where it should be because we haven't been investing in the infrastructure of this country in the United States in a long, long time. And many other countries have that same problem, right? Australia has an amazing grid and they're trying out a lot of interesting future stuff, but only 20 million people live in Australia, right?
Yeah.
That's the LA County area.
Well, and
right?
hyper concentrated in a few major urban
That's
areas, right? There's something like 87% of their entire populations in 6 cities.
That's right. And you and I talked about rural and then rural, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got all these massive problems that we're trying to power with AI or fix with AI. And what it's going to take is, are we firing back up coal plants to power a data center using AI to do weather models? That makes no sense, right?
Right.
So what's the trade-off? Nobody knows. Right? Can we build faster? Can we permit faster? Can we change again when I talked about policy and then the economics, right? That's on the policy end to be able to build clean energy, right? Renewables to power all of this. And are we going to get there? Or are we going to hit some theoretical wall?
Yeah.
And the problem with that wall is that big corporations could say, you know what? I will fire up that coal-powered power plant and I'll just pay for the pollution because I'm making enough money running all these servers.
Right.
And that kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? So there is a hard line in megawatts needed to power these data centers. And what we really need is a lot of these big companies to be like, do the economics make sense for us to slow down to let that solar power plant get built? Or to buy energy from the next state over, or to buy energy from Canada, if it's the United States or Mexico or whatever, right? And man, a lot of people are just like hinting at it, but there's not a lot of people who are sitting down and thinking about it. And what's scary is from a policy perspective, I can't name people who are thinking about that, right?
Yeah. Do we know at all what the total cost in infrastructure improvements we need? And do those numbers, even if we had an idea of them, do they include artificial intelligence in them? Because I suspect they probably don't.
I suspect they don't either, right? When you look at investment needed to get to like 1.5 and to keep us under 2 degrees, right, for global warming, that's in the trillions of dollars.
Oh, certainly.
So I imagine that this is right.
And we're still building lanes of highway.
That's right. That's right.
Like,
And we're fixing bridges that are 40 years old because they need to be fixed, right? So it's and land rights, right of way. Gosh, I don't want that turbine in my backyard,
right,
right? Can't we just put
right.
them all offshore? But then how do you bring the power back? And so it's a lot, right? There's no clear answer to it. And again, what I'm more worried about is that the people in office don't have a committee somewhere working on it. And I hope they do, and maybe you and I just haven't heard about it, but I somehow doubt that.
Yeah, it's funny in a country that prides itself on so much privatization. When it comes to this kind of two things I want to point out to our listeners. Yeah. One, when you have a global issue like this, the idea of working within governments, I mean, it's the business model, right? Which we certainly all seek justice from,
Totally.
You know what I mean? But it's also the model we're more likely, by which we can create a vehicle or vehicles that are going to solve a problem at a global level. And we absolutely rely on government subsidy for, most of this stuff, anything having to do with infrastructure, right? That's the model. That's been the model since after World War II. And even before that, but it really ramped up after the war. So it's kind of how we do things, but right now we're not able, we don't have any hard and fast numbers even on it, right? We just know that it's certainly going to cost a lot of money. While we're watching here I live in the interior of a coastal part of the United States and just came from the greater Boston area. And people believe in climate change, not because of politics, and regardless of your politics. Why? Because if you're a major property owner in the financial district, you're probably pumping out the basement of your high rise 24/7 at this point, and you didn't have to do that 25 years ago. And that's a quote from a friend.
Yeah.
Who's a property owner, so like, I mean, we can't give up hope.
No. And to be positive, I've seen a lot of traction with software companies, developers, startups that are writing very efficient code, right? And this efficient code burns less, uses less energy. There's a whole sub movement in software and SaaS that is efficient code because those people care about the planet too. They're the ones actually, making Zoom work that you and I are talking on right now, right? Yep. And they know that Zoom uses X amount of processing power, X amount of the battery of the laptops or desktops that you're on, right? And there's people in that ethos and in that community that are like, well, what if we wrote better code that used less energy, that was less taxing, right? Oh, and by the way, it loads faster, looks cleaner, our code's better, right? And here's Copilot that's helping us write that AI code, right? And so there's people working on it at this base level, and there's people who are like, look, I have a better transmission line, right? Instead of using this outdated material from 50 years ago, I'm going to use this new material that we just developed at this university or in our lab. It's going to have a 90% efficiency rate for carrying the electricity instead of 60%, right? Now, who's paying to replace all those cables with the newer material, right? But then there's other people who are like, you know what is even more efficient? Solid state transformers. Let's take this transformer that nobody's looked at and done any work with in a long time. People always have to overbuy these transformers, right? They buy a 50 and they really need a 25. So I'll do a solid state transformer that is just giving them exactly what they need super efficiently. Now, again, somebody has to replace that old transformer and somebody has to pay for that and figure it out. But people at least are innovating and changing and building towards a future with better power lines, solid state transformers to carry that electricity to power that AI that's helping us with the weather model or whatever it might be, right? So to your point, folks listening at home, don't give up hope. And all the things I mentioned are people that I know or people that I've met kind of along the way that are working on those particular ideas. So it's real and it's happening.
Imagine a vibrant region that embraces innovative technology and systems, allowing individuals and businesses to grow and thrive within the natural and cultural lifestyle of Vermont. Imagine the Black River Innovation Campus. Our community includes business and technology programming, co-working and technology tools, and other exciting experiences that are quickly creating an outsized impact to our little corner of northern New England here in Springfield, Vermont. PC Mag rates Springfield, Vermont number 8 for the best work-from-home cities in the U.S. Join us in Vermont. Begin your journey at bricvt.org.
So you're a venture capitalist. What are you jazzed about these days? Fill us in on some cool secrets.
Yes. Some of what I just told you, right? Yeah. I think there's a lot of people doing very interesting things. DexMat is the startup, DEXMAT, that's working on kind of new material called Galvorn for power transmission lines. There's another startup that's kind of in stealth at the University of Texas that's working on solid state transformers, right? And there's actually a couple of companies doing that. There's another company called Helix Earth. Helix Earth is building a kind of radical retrofit for HVAC systems that does a lot of the dehumidification, because that's a major load on everybody's air conditioning, especially is taking all that humidity out, because we as humans like to live 70 to like 75, right? And your air conditioner does a lot of work to keep you there. And you can imagine if it's 100, I take you down to 70, but in, the place maybe where you live, Scott, it's 5, and I got to take you all the way up to 70, right?
Yeah.
And so they're building.
And by the way, we're doing it mostly because I live in a mountainous region, mostly with oil.
That's right.
Lord, if you've always been on gas or electricity and suddenly you have to buy oil, I just don't know how my neighbors can do it. I'm relatively well off compared to many of my neighbors. Now, I'm not bragging. I'm saying how are people coming up with $3,000 and $4,000 a shot to fill an oil tank for a month?
That's another good one, right? There's lots of these startups that are working on biofuels.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. How do we get away from kind of petrochemical based burning, and what is the version of that where 80% of the feedstock is malt that they get from
waste to energy solutions, whether it comes from AD or pyrolysis or any other form of breaking it down, some sort of breakdown that doesn't involve noxious gas going out into the atmosphere, and a lot of this stuff, we've had the technologies for decades, right? Yeah. But we're not, there's either key elements to it that just need to be refined so that it really becomes marketable, or even when it is marketable, it's really in the financial models that these things fail. I'm saying this as a past, a little more than a decade ago, being in waste energy for a while, but never getting off the ground for reasons of like greed and financial models. It has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with implementation and people's fears in implementing, or, just big commodities companies making sure you can't scale because, you'd become competition,
Absolutely. Right. And, part of that too, for us, I think that's super interesting also is what we see in the headlines, a lot of the news around carbon capture, right? And carbon capture needed, should be invested in. This idea of a world where we're putting out as much as we're taking back, right? At these two opposite forces. These things will still emit carbon because we haven't figured out how to do it yet, but we have things to take that carbon out of the air, right? These nature-based solutions are very interesting to me because the headlines are giant factory built to actually suck air out into a membrane and, put it underneath the earth. But the things that are more interesting to us are a lot of these nature-based systems, right? And how you accelerate what nature's already doing, either weatherization, algae. There's a great company called Liliana out of Texas that's doing a lot with modified algae and that cleans the water, gathers CO2, and then dies and sinks to the bottom.
Yeah.
And, depending on how deep the water is, that's almost a permanent solution to taking carbon out of the air, right?
Yeah.
So
Besides the
there's a
fact it's a
lot of,
natural process that's happening anyhow, and it doesn't have a deleterious effect to the ocean floor.
that's right.
It doesn't, Mother Nature, she scaled a long time ago.
That's right.
You
That's
know?
right. And so how do we do that with the rock weatherization or algae or just a lot of these interesting nature-based carbon solutions, right? And to me, that stuff's fascinating. And I think again, the neat part about being a venture capitalist is we're working with a whole network of universities to see what's lab to a little bit of scale to an actual team to the team goes out and does something, right? Starts to get non-dilutive money, starts to pitch people like us for money. And then we're also just seeing fully formed startups that come out of an incubator or an accelerator or out of somebody's garage and doing really interesting stuff. And, that's a lot of our past investments is those material science folks who are out there in a garage somewhere inventing a new nanoparticle.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no shortage of really fine places and to find groups of teams that are on to something, they just need that, they need that break and, and the interest in the marketplace and from smart people. David J. Neff, I hope that you'll consider coming back and we'll do a podcast interview just focused on climate tech.
I would love
Sounds
that.
like we have a lot that we can be talking about there. And, we place a high priority on environmental sciences and on environmental innovation here in the state of Vermont. It'd be interesting to get the perspective of somebody not here and where the focuses should be, because we have a lot of that kind of talent up here close to the border,
Yeah, no, I would love to do that. And, again, to go back to kind of our report on AI, and, what you can find at our website, Ecliptic Capital, is a lot of it, is interestingly based in our three areas, but we do some interesting deep dives on climate, obviously on cybersecurity, and then healthcare. So folks listening to this, definitely, if any of those three areas are of interest, or you're working in a startup, or you want to work in a startup in one of those areas, or you're just interested in those topics, we have some great breakdown on the stats, the behind the scenes. And then also, a little bit, Scott, on what you and I talked about is like AI creativity, right? Writers, painters, photographers, like
you
all
gotta
these
pay
folks,
the artist, man.
musicians.
Can I just
That's
say,
right.
like, why, with the billions being invested, why aren't we paying people?
And one of the bumper stickers at South by this year that an artist was selling was like something to the effect of like, AI is coming for our art, and it's kind of up to you to ask hard questions and be like, is this a human did this or did AI do this? And like, who are you trying to support and why? And they put it much more succinctly than I did. But I was like, oh, it's so interesting and thought provoking because this guy was doing posters. He hand draws national park posters. And you can imagine maybe AI does a sloppy job of what Death Valley looks like. But a little farther down the line, maybe it does an okay job with it, right? And he's like, so who are you supporting? Are you supporting me as an artist? Or are you supporting some computer generated thing off of a website?
I mean, honestly, and again, this would make yet another interesting podcast episode. But it could actually be turned around, and it could be a great revenue source for artists. I mean, if you're going to create a tool that's going to aggregate the actual artwork of potentially millions of craftspeople all over the world, then great. Let's find a way to, I'm sure it's not that complicated. If you can find their data online and aggregate it in an AI generator, you can certainly pay them all something. We already have it, folks. It's, again, right, the innovation in financial models, it's called blanket licensing. Like it already exists. We could do it,
Right.
I just like, it's totally cool to use my stuff, but pay the artists.
That's right.
That's
right.
We went to school, we learned how to do it, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And they have raw natural talent to be able to go and do it.
Right on, right on. You know, show that you value that, right?
That's right.
I want to let our listeners know that in addition to David's reference to the report, we're going to make sure that we have the link to Ecliptic Capital's website on the episode page for this Are We Here Yet episode, so that people can easily access it. And people will be able to find that at the SM Graves Associates website, but also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So no matter where they go, no matter how you listen, you can also go grab this report, read it. Even if you're like artificial intelligence, I haven't even put any thought into it. Maybe you should, because it's going to affect and is affecting all of us. So read the damn report. No? Right?
Thank you, Scott.
David, thank you very much for coming on the show, and I hope you'll come back again soon.
You bet. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com. We talk with vibraphonist Gary Burton. We were able to catch up with him at the 60th Newport Jazz Festival. In the first of our two-part interview, Gary tells us about when he started playing the vibes and about his autobiography that was published in 2013. Enjoy the show.
Hi, this is vibraphonist Gary Burton, inviting you to join me in the Jazz Room with host Joan Watson-Jones.
Hello, welcome to the Jazz Room. I'm your host, Joan Watson-Jones. Thanks for stopping by. Come in, relax while we enjoy great jazz. Each week we present the music of independent jazz artists as well as those we've grown to love through the years. And yes, of course, the legends. We open with our guest, vibraphonist Gary Burton. This begins the first in a two-part interview with him. We talked with Gary at the 60th Newport Jazz Festival. You're listening to a cut from his 2013 CD titled Guided Tour, the new Gary Burton Quartet. Right now, let's listen to Gary Burton and his quartet performing The Lookout. Welcome to the Jazz Room, Gary Burton.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Oh, now we're here at the Newport Jazz Festival 2014, the 60th anniversary.
That's
How
right.
do you feel about being here for the 60th anniversary?
Well, I think I date back almost as much as anyone. In 2014, my first Newport festival was in 1960. I was 17 years old, and I've been back every few years ever since that time. So this is practically a second home for me.
Yes, yes. Now, you're with your band,
Yes.
the Barry Burton New Quartet?
Well, actually, in this case, it's a quintet.
Quintet,
I've
okay.
added a pianist, Vadim Nezalovsky, who's played with me off and on for the last 6-7 years on different projects. And so for a few festivals this summer, including Newport, Chicago, and Detroit, we're a quintet, actually. But otherwise, Julian Lage on guitar, who's been playing with my band for, well, the past 12 years now. And current rhythm section, Marcus Gilmore on drums. He happens to be the grandson of Roy Haynes, who I played this festival with back in the 60s several times and was in my band for 6 years back in that era. So it's kind of a thrill to have the family tradition continue on.
Tell us a little bit about it. When did you start playing vibes?
Well, I was 6 years old. And everybody says, well, how did you come to choose the vibraphone when you were 6 years old? And the answer is, I didn't choose it. My parents did. They wanted all the kids in the family, 3 of us, to have music lessons. And my older sister had started piano. And they looked around and found that there was a lady in the neighborhood where I was growing up that played the marimba and the vibraphone. So they took me to her for lessons, and that's how I got introduced to it. Just a real coincidence. It's not a very well-known instrument, and there just happened to be one in my area, and that's got me started. And nothing much happened until I stumbled onto jazz. About age 13 or 14, I would say, I heard a jazz record and just was enthralled. And so from that point on, instead of just playing around for fun, it became much more serious and passionate, and on from there.
Do you remember the record?
Yes, it was a Benny Goodman record, and it wasn't one of his original group with Lionel Hampton or anything. It was just one of his bands in the 1950s, which would have been about the time I was growing up. And but I just never heard any music like that. It was so exciting, and the rhythm and the soloing, improvising. Wow, it was a revelation to me. So I just knew this is what I wanted to do. So I started looking for jazz records and trying to copy what I was hearing, and that's how most of us get started.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now, how did you come to work with Hank Garland and Chet Aiken?
Well, I grew up in a small town near Nashville. I mean, 3-4 hours away by car. I was in southern Indiana, but it's not that far from Nashville. And turns out that Hank Garland was a very successful, well-known country guitar player and recording star. But he had taken up jazz in a big way and convinced his record label at the time, which was CBS, to let him make a jazz record instead of a country record. And he really wanted the sound of vibes and guitar. But there were no vibes players in Nashville. And someone told him about me, that there's this high school kid in Indiana that plays the vibes pretty well. You might want to give him a listen. So I rode down to Nashville with another musician a few weeks later with my vibraphone in the car, and got together, played a couple of tunes with Hank. He liked it, and invited me to come to Nashville for the summer before I went off to college to play a local club on weekends, and then to also make this record. So that's how I made Hank's acquaintance and got really my career started. And then Chet Atkins came into the picture, another legendary country guitarist, because he became a fan. He would come to hear us at this little club on weekends, and at the end of the summer he arranged for RCA Victor to offer me a record contract of my own. So when I went off to college here in Boston that fall, you know, not only had I made a record already, but I had my own record contract ready to go. And I was with RCA for 8 years, made a lot of records, launched my career with them. So that was a real turning point, and I'm sure I'm the only jazz musician who started their career in Nashville, Tennessee.
The Vermont Technology Alliance. The VTTA is the only statewide organization focused on Vermont's tech business sector and entrepreneurs. Our business members are Fortune 500 companies, startup founders, small business owners, and soloists. We provide advocacy, recruiting of tech talent, events, and other networking opportunities. We are the heart of the tech ecosystem in Vermont. Become a member now at vtta.org. The Vermont Technology Alliance. Tech thrives here.
Now let's listen to another cut from Guided Tour, the new Gary Burton Quartet, Monkfish. You're in the Jazz Room. I'm your host, Joan Watson Jones. We continue with our interview with vibraphonist Gary Burton, recorded when we were at the 60th Newport Jazz Festival. Okay, now you've written your autobiography, and it's called what? Learning to Listen. Now, what moved you to write your autobiography?
Well, when I got to be about 60, that was like roughly 10 years ago, you know, you start looking back more about all the things you've done, the people you've known and played with, and you have now more of a sense of the arc of the history and everything. And I had, for years, I had collected stories, anecdotes, things that I thought were interesting. I used to keep stacks of index cards that I would jot things down on. I had hundreds of them, and always thinking that someday I would have a use for these. So I decided that I'd like to try, writing my story and see, if it seemed interesting, as I got into it, and if not, I'm sure lose interest on it or something. But I kept kind of working away on it in fits and starts, and finally, after writing the first 100 pages over and over about 4 times and stalling out, I sat down to work on it again and got a complete first draft, and then spent a couple of years rewriting the whole thing till I kind of was happy with it and got it published. And it's not only been very well received, it actually won the Best Jazz Book of 2013, the award from the Jazz Journalists Association. I just found out about that a couple of weeks ago.
I remember. Yes, I remember that.
That was a real honor, coming from 300 critics and professional writers, to choose my book of all the ones they could have selected. That made my day, for sure.
Yes. Now, why the title "Learning to Listen"?
Well, I was looking for a title that referred to not only more literally learning about music, but also learning to listen to your own inner feelings, your own inner conscience, your own sense of creativity and identity. And I address these things in the book, not only jazz history and the people I've played with and the experience I've had, but also what the creative process is like, how we grow as musicians, how we evolve as players. I mean, the questions I get from people all the time are, how do you know what notes to play next? You have no music in front of you. How do you know what he's going to play next? And you seem to always play together perfectly, but it's like magic and stuff. So I've always wanted to kind of try to explain that to some extent, sort of give people an idea how this particular kind of creativity works and how we learn to develop it.
Oh yes. It's such a marvelous process. When you're in it, it's just such a marvelous process.
It is. It's like learning a language, just like we speak the same way, spontaneously to each other, and think nothing of it. And that's what improvising musicians do. We talk in the language of music to each other, and we're so used to doing it spontaneously that we can be coherent at doing it. So it's really like learning another language.
Yeah, I have a musician friend that said, we've been together so long now, we can read each other's minds.
Yeah, well, that's
exactly what it is.
Exactly, when I play with Chick Corea, which we've been playing together for 43 years now, and we tour every year, it feels like we know much of the time what the other guy is about to play, so that we can respond immediately or anticipate what's going to happen next. And it's a wonderful feeling that when it's that interactive.
It is, because to us it's kind of like normal, but to the rest of the world it's magic.
Yeah.
Now here's 2 more cuts from the CD Guided Tour, the new Gary Burton Quartet, Jackalope, and Sunday's Uncle. ends part one of our interview with Gary Burton. We'll pick up in the next program with Gary talking about his work at Berklee College of Music and how to tap into the inner player in us all. Thank you for spending time here with us in the Jazz Room. You'll find photos and a link to Gary's website on the Jazz Room page of my website, JoanWatsonJones.com. And now you can find me on Twitter, hashtag @MsJazzKitty, or you can email me also through the Jazz Room page of my website. Until next time, you've been in the Jazz Room. I'm your host, Joan Watson-Jones.
The Jazz Room is distributed by M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.